Many of the world's governments showed sympathy.
It became more widespread.
Some photographs are so strange, shocking, or controversial that history books refuse to show them. From mysterious figures to unsettling events and scenes that challenge everything we thought we knew about the past. These rare, crazy, and downright bizarre images capture forgotten moments that are just unexplainable.
And it was flat, completely flat. Every piece of glass was broken.
What secrets are hidden in these arts, and why are they kept from public view?
By the end of the war, he'd gathered 8,500 paintings.
Was directly responsible stealing of paintings that he wanted for himself.
Join us as we reveal the most unbelievable old photographs history tried to bury. Number 40. The tragic fate of the Selk'nam natives. We begin with this photograph taken back in 1889. The Chilean government allowed a group of Selk'nam natives, including a kid just 8 years old, to be taken to Europe to be displayed in something called human zoos. The Selk'nam people, along with other Patagonian natives, were seen as a rarity back then. Between the years 1878 and 1900, 3 groups of indigenous people, including the Tehuelche, Selk'nam, and Kaweskar, were sent to Europe for this purpose. Once there, they were treated more like objects than people. Sadly, their language, known as Ona, also disappeared. According to the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, the last speakers of Ona died in the 1980s. Moving from the heartbreaking story of extinct tribes, we now shift to the image of a man who dared to challenge death itself. Number 39. The first cryonically preserved human. James Bedford was a psychologist with terminal cancer who made history on January 12, 1967, by becoming the first person to be cryonically preserved. On that day, he passed away at 1:15 in the afternoon. Right after his death, the Cryonics Society of California prepared his body for preservation. As shown in this photo, his body was placed in a metal container and sent to a cryonics facility in Arizona, where it still remains. When Bedford was in his 70s, he learned he had cancer. That's when he got interested in cryonics and reached out to Robert Nelson, who was part of the Cryonics Society of California. Doctors from the society used a chemical called dimethyl sulfoxide to protect Bedford's organs from freezing. Then, they placed him in a specially made capsule for long-term preservation. Even though many scientists were doubtful about cryonics, Bedford's body has remained frozen for more than 55 years. Today, he is kept at the Alcor Life Extension Foundation in Scottsdale, Arizona, alongside another famous name, baseball legend Ted Williams. While Bedford's family chose traditional burial or cremation for themselves, he remains frozen, with the possibility of waking up someday to find himself surrounded by strangers. Number 38. The portable prison on wheels. This surprising photo shows a police officer driving a motorcycle with a prisoner locked in a cage attached to a sidecar. It dates back to the 1920s. Back then, the traffic police in Los Angeles used these unique vehicles to catch and transport drivers who broke speed limits or parking rules. The cage, called a portable prison, was a small one-person jail cell measuring 4 square feet. It was attached to the side of the officer's motorcycle. The design kept the prisoner close enough to the officer, making it possible for the officer to quickly unlock the cage. Interestingly, the prisoner might have even been able to reach the brakes if they tried. Number 37. Samoan women in human zoos. In 1910, this eerie photograph was taken of Samoan women put on display in Hamburg as part of something called a human zoo. This cruel practice was disguised as a way to educate people about other cultures, but it was really just a form of exploitation that reinforced racist ideas. Human zoos, also known as ethnological exhibitions, were common in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They involved publicly showing people, often portraying them as living in a so-called natural or primitive state. These exhibitions took place in major cities like Paris, Hamburg, Antwerp, Barcelona, London, Milan, and New York City. Number 36. Zambia's ambitious space program. In the 1960s, Zambia dreamed of competing in the space race alongside the United States and the Soviet Union. Their space program was led by Edward Makuka Nkoloso, who trained his Afronauts in some very unusual ways. For example, as we notice in this picture, they would roll down hills in oil barrels and use swings to practice weightlessness. By 1965, Nkoloso claimed he had built a spaceship, but it was never launched because they didn't have enough money or resources. One part of this story that's true is about a young astronaut named Martha Mwamba. She was a 16-year-old girl chosen for a mission to Mars. However, her plans to go to space were cut short when she became pregnant during her training at the space camp. Number 35. Sakhalin Penal Colony. The photograph you're looking at is from 1912 and shows a prisoner who has been whipped in the Sakhalin Penal Colony, located in the Russian Far East. The Sakhalin Penal Colony, set up in the late 19th century, became infamous as a place where criminals and political prisoners were sent in Imperial Russia. People were sent there for serious crimes like murder, theft, or even speaking out against the government. The island's isolated location made it the perfect spot for authorities to hide away and punish offenders. The conditions there were incredibly harsh, with prisoners forced to work long hours, barely given enough food, and often beaten. Sadly, prison systems around the world have long histories of ignoring basic human rights, as we can also see in the brutal treatment of minority prisoners in America. Number 34. Bibb County State Prison. In 1937, a photo was taken of two black men locked in wooden stocks at Bibb County State Prison in Brent, Alabama. This harsh image serves as a painful reminder of the deep racism and cruel treatment that were common in the American prison system at the time. The prison, located in Georgia, had a reputation for its brutal conditions, especially for African American prisoners. Many were forced to work without pay, given barely enough food, and subjected to cruel punishments. Number 33. Nagasaki Atomic Bombing Survivor. This powerful photograph from 1945 shows a survivor of the atomic bombing the United States dropped on Nagasaki, an attack that immediately wiped out an estimated 40,000 people. Even though she seems to be smiling, her face shows the deep pain and trauma caused by one of the worst events in history. The explosion destroyed everything, flattening buildings and turning the city into rubble. The survivors, known as hibakusha, dealt with severe injuries, radiation sickness, and lasting health problems. Many were left with burns, blindness, and other serious injuries. Number 32. Genocide in Southwest Africa. In 1904, during the German colonial rule in Southwest Africa, Herero and Nama prisoners were forced to work under terrible conditions. Thousands of them died in concentration camps, marking a heartbreaking part of colonial history. The violence started when the Herero and Nama people rose up against German control, which led to a fierce military response from the Germans. The Herero, led by Samuel Maharero, and the Nama, led by Hendrik Witbooi, initially fought back, but they were eventually defeated by the well-armed German forces. Number 31. Asaro Mudman of Papua New Guinea. In 1969, a photographer captured an Asaro Mudman from Papua New Guinea wearing the famous clay mask. These masks were an important part of ceremonies, meant to summon spirits and scare enemies, and became a symbol of the tribe's identity. The Asaro Mudmen from the Asaro Valley have a long-standing tradition of crafting and wearing these spooky clay masks. The masks, with their exaggerated features and painted in white clay, were believed to hold spiritual power and were used to frighten rival tribes during battles. The tradition of the Asaro mudmen goes back to a legend where the tribe, hiding from their enemies, emerged from the Asaro River. Number 30. Mujahideen fighters in Kunar Province. In 1980, in the Kunar Province of Afghanistan, anti-government Mujahideen fighters were seen crossing a river in a unique way, using air-filled animal skins to float. This creative and clever method became one of their many tactics during the Soviet-Afghan War. The Mujahideen, a group made up of different Afghan resistance factions, relied on guerrilla warfare to fight against the Soviet forces, who had invaded Afghanistan in 1979. Number 29. Children. During the Spanish Civil War. During the Spanish Civil War, a photograph was taken of children pretending to carry out executions in 1936. This image captured the harsh reality of how violence and fear were part of everyday life for these kids during the war. The Spanish Civil War, which lasted from 1936 to 1939, was a brutal battle between the Republicans and the Nationalists, led by General Francisco Franco. The war caused widespread destruction and loss of life, with many innocent civilians caught in the middle. Number 28. Hermann Göring's opulent bed. In May of 1945, an American soldier was captured in a photo while relaxing on Hermann Göring's luxurious bed. Hanging above him was a stolen painting by Rubens, a clear sign of the Nazi leader's obsession with hoarding valuable art during World War II. Göring, one of Adolf Hitler's top allies, was known for his large-scale looting of art and cultural treasures from across Europe. He gathered a massive collection of stolen artwork, which he proudly displayed in his lavish homes. After the war, many efforts were made to recover and return these artworks to their rightful owners. The Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, better known as the Monuments Men, played a key role in this mission. Number 27. Russia's economic transition. In 1994, thousands of jobless people lined up at a Moscow job fair during Russia's messy shift to capitalism. This scene, with so many desperate for work, became a harsh symbol of the struggles after the fall of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Russia's economy went through huge changes as it moved from a state-run system to a market economy. This change brought about massive privatization, the closing of state-owned companies, and the rise of powerful new business tycoons. Number 26. Decoy coastal artillery. In 1942, near Blackhead, Newfoundland, a fake coastal artillery system was built as part of a clever World War II trick to confuse potential German attackers. This sneaky strategy involved making fake military setups to distract the enemy and draw their focus away from important targets. The decoy artillery, made from wood and other materials, was designed to look like a real defense system from both the air and the sea. The goal was to keep key areas safe from German naval and airstrikes. These decoys were part of a bigger plan of military deception used throughout the war, including the famous Operation Fortitude, which helped make the D-Day landings successful. Number 25. Texas animal fights. This photo from 1906 shows brutal animal fights in Texas arenas, where lions, tigers, and rhinos were forced to battle each other. These shows, a disturbing mix of entertainment and cruelty, were eventually banned after public outrage over their inhumanity. Large crowds gathered to watch these dangerous and exotic animals fight, drawn in by the bloodshed. The fights were often held in makeshift arenas, with no care for the animals' well-being. The aftermath saw many of the animals seriously hurt or slain. As people spoke out against such cruelty, awareness grew about the need to protect animals. Number 24. Anti-religious rally in Uzbekistan. On March 8, 1927, during an anti-religious rally organized by the Soviet Union in Uzbekistan, women set fire to their burqas as a symbol of freedom under Soviet rule. This act was meant to represent progress, focusing on gender equality and secularism, which matched the Soviet goal of modernizing and removing religion from Central Asian cultures. Burning the burqas was a way of rejecting old traditions and embracing new, progressive ideas. But this action sparked strong opposition from traditional communities who saw it as an attack on their culture and religious beliefs. Many resisted the changes imposed by the Soviets, holding on to their customs. As a result, tensions grew between the Soviet authorities and the local people, leading to more strict control and efforts to force Soviet ideas onto the population. Number 23. Stalin's bulletproof car. In 1947, a photograph was taken of the ZIS-115, Stalin's specially made bulletproof car, going through tough ballistic tests. The pictures, which were later declassified, showed just how far they went to keep the Soviet leader safe, highlighting the fear and danger of the time. The ZIS-115 was built to survive bullets and explosions, with thick armor and bulletproof glass. This was all because Stalin faced several assassination attempts and constant threats during his time in power. The car was put through serious testing, with different types of bullets and explosives shot at it to make sure it could withstand attacks. After these tests, it was clear how much the Soviet regime was willing to do to protect its leader. The fear around Stalin's safety mirrored the overall climate of fear and suspicion that ruled during his leadership. Number 22. The vault of the Soviet State Bank. In 1964, a photograph was taken of the vault at the Soviet State Bank in Moscow, giving a rare glimpse into one of the world's most secretive financial institutions. The image showed the massive amounts of gold and currency stored inside, representing the Soviet Union's powerful economy. The Soviet State Bank was essential in managing the country's finances, controlling money flow, and overseeing the economy. To protect these valuable assets, there were tight security measures in place, including armed guards, advanced locks, and surveillance systems. This photo captured how the Soviet Union worked hard to keep its economy stable and project strength during the Cold War. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the vault's contents were closely examined and redistributed as the newly formed Russian Federation worked to stabilize its economy. Number 21. Arrival of television in Gozo Island. In 1958, the people of Gozo Island, Malta, were amazed when television first arrived. This photo captures the moment when locals gathered together to watch it for the very first time, signaling a big change for rural communities as they embraced new technology. The arrival of television brought the outside world into the homes of Gozo's residents, giving them access to news, entertainment, and education that they hadn't had before. Television quickly became a must-have in every household, just like it did everywhere else, shaping the culture of Gozo Island and helping to modernize the community. Number 20. German sniper attack on de Gaulle's convoy. In late August of 1944, a German sniper took aim at General Charles de Gaulle's convoy as it made its way into Paris, which had just been liberated. This attack served as a reminder that even during moments of victory, danger was still very much present as World War II was still ongoing. De Gaulle, a major leader in the French resistance and head of the Free French forces, was entering Paris to celebrate its freedom from Nazi control. The sniper's attempt on his life showed just how much of a threat the remaining German forces and their collaborators still posed. As a result of this attack, security around de Gaulle and other Allied leaders was increased. Despite the danger, de Gaulle remained an important figure in France's liberation and rebuilding. However, this next image marks the end of another significant war. Number 19. Surrender of Pakistani Army. This photograph, taken in 1971, shows Indian soldiers examining the weapons surrendered by the Pakistani army after the war that led to the independence of Bangladesh. This moment in history marked the end of a violent conflict and the birth of a new country. The war, which lasted from December 3rd to December 16th, 1971, involved fierce fighting between Indian and Pakistani forces. The Pakistani army, commanded by Lieutenant General Aak Niazi, officially surrendered to the Indian Army, led by Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, on December 16, 1971. Following the war, Bangladesh, which was once known as East Pakistan, became an independent nation. The surrender was the largest since World War II, with around 93,000 Pakistani soldiers taken as prisoners. The war caused immense loss of life and widespread destruction, leaving deep emotional scars. Number 18. Soviet Snowball Operation. In 1954, Soviet soldiers were involved in a top-secret mission known as Snowball Operation in Russia. A massive atomic bomb with a power of 40 kilotons was set off about 11 kilometers north of Totskoye, near Orenburg, to see how it would affect military defenses. Around 40,000 soldiers, with no protection, were positioned just 1 kilometer away from the explosion in trenches, and nearby civilians were also exposed, putting roughly 45,000 people at risk of radiation. The purpose of the operation was to study how nuclear weapons would impact soldiers and equipment. After the explosion, many soldiers and civilians suffered from severe radiation exposure, leading to long-lasting health problems like cancer and other diseases caused by radiation. Number 17. Capture of Francisco Macias Nguema. The deposed dictator of Equatorial Guinea, Francisco Macias Nguema, was photographed after being captured, visibly showing signs of withdrawal in 1979. Known for his corrupt rule, he is believed to have caused the deaths of between 50,000 and 400,000 people, making him a symbol of cruelty and oppression. Nguema's leadership was marked by severe human rights violations, poor economic decisions, and widespread fear. He established a one-party system and made himself president for life, ruling with total control. After his capture, he was tried and convicted for genocide, mass murder, and other crimes against humanity. Nguema was executed by firing squad on September 29, 1979. Number 16. Felix Verla's elastic skin. In 1908, Felix Verla stunned audiences with his incredibly stretchy skin, a condition caused by Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. The photo of Verla performing as a sideshow attraction amazed people in the early 20th century. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a group of disorders that affect connective tissues, making skin and joints unusually flexible. Verla's ability to stretch his skin to amazing lengths caught the attention of many and made him a well-known figure in the sideshow world. His performances helped the public learn about rare medical conditions, although it was more out of fascination and spectacle than true understanding and compassion. Verla's story sheds light on the complicated history of sideshows, where people with unique physical features were both admired and exploited. Number 15. Cuban intervention in Angola. The picture shows a Cuban soldier standing next to two native prisoners during the Cuban intervention in Angola in 1977. This conflict, which was part of the Cold War, represents the larger ideological struggles happening around the world. The Cuban intervention, known as Operation Carlotta, started in 1975 when Cuba sent troops to support the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, or MPLA, in their fight against the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, or UNITA, and the National Liberation Front of Angola, or FNLA. After the intervention, Cuba maintained a significant military presence in Angola, with thousands of soldiers involved in combat. The conflict helped the MPLA win and set up a socialist government in Angola. However, the war caused massive destruction and loss of life, leaving a long-lasting impact on the region's stability and growth. But the next picture is even more upsetting, showing prisoners of war suffering under oppression. Number 14. Dutch Marine threatens Indonesian fighters. In 1946, a Dutch Marine was seen threatening captured Indonesian fighters with the butt of his rifle on the island of Java during the Independence War. After the Japanese occupation, the Dutch tried to regain control but struggled to defeat the growing resistance. By the end of 1949, the Dutch had to recognize Indonesia's independence. The Indonesian National Revolution, which started in 1945, was filled with intense guerrilla warfare and had widespread support from the Indonesian people for independence. The Dutch military, using tactics like the police actions, tried to stop the movement but faced strong opposition from Indonesian nationalists. The result of the war was Indonesia officially gaining sovereignty on December 27, 1949, ending more than 300 years of Dutch colonial rule. Number 13. Charles Manson's court escort. In 1969, this photo shows Charles Manson being taken to court after being found guilty of leading a string of brutal murders. His actions made him one of the most well-known criminals in American history. Manson, who was the leader of a group called the Manson family, convinced his followers to carry out several murders, including the shocking death of actress Sharon Tate and others in 1969. Manson believed the murders would spark a race war, which he called Helter Skelter. After his conviction, Manson was given a life sentence and spent the rest of his life in prison, where he passed away in 2017. The trial and media coverage brought a lot of attention to the terrible crimes committed by his cult and the dangerous power Manson had over his followers. Number 12. Italian soldiers hauling artillery in the Alps. In 1914, Italian soldiers were photographed carrying heavy artillery across the Alps during World War I. The tough landscape and rough terrain showed just how hard it was for the troops in mountain combat. The Italian front, known for its steep and rocky hills, created big problems for both sides in terms of logistics and strategy. Soldiers had to climb up steep slopes, deal with freezing weather, and walk on dangerous paths while carrying heavy weapons and supplies. As a result of these tough conditions, many soldiers ended up with frostbite, extreme fatigue, and sickness from the high altitude. The harsh environment also meant that many soldiers were unable to get the medical help they needed, leading to high casualty numbers. Number 11. Amanda Lear as Salvador Dali's muse. In 1970, Amanda Lear posed as Salvador Dali's muse, and this moment was captured in a famous photo. Her gender sparked a lot of rumors, but these were mostly based on society's biases, rather than the truth. Lear worked closely with Dali, helping to create several iconic pieces that reflected the surreal artist's unique style. Even though there was some controversy, Lear's role in Dali's art was important and clear. She went on to continue her work in the art world, eventually earning recognition for her creative abilities. Number 10. Soviet crackdown on hippies. This photograph showed Soviet undercover police arresting a young man they called a hippie in the 1980s. These crackdowns were part of the government's push to control youth subcultures that they saw as a threat to the revolution. The Soviet leaders believed the hippie movement was a challenge to their power because it was linked to Western ideas and rebellion. As a result of these arrests, many young people faced severe punishments, like imprisonment and forced labor. The photo of the arrest serves as a reminder of the harsh methods used by the Soviet government to maintain its control and the strength of youth cultures that resisted repression. This next picture, however, marked the end of a major world war. Number 9. pyramid of captured German weapons. After World War I ended, a huge pyramid made of captured German weapons was put up in Place de la Concorde in Paris in 1919. This pyramid was meant to represent victory and the defeat of the German Empire. It was made up of artillery, rifles, and other military gear taken from the defeated German army. The display was meant to celebrate the Allies' win and the end of the brutal war. After the war, there were huge political and territorial changes in Europe, with the Treaty of Versailles forcing tough penalties on Germany. The pyramid of weapons stood as a strong reminder of the war's devastation and the hope for a lasting peace. Number 8. Cultural contrast in the 1960s. A group of nuns was photographed watching a stylish woman walk past them in the 1960s. This picture perfectly shows the cultural differences between traditional and modern life during that time. The 1960s were a significant period of change, with new trends in fashion, music, and ways of living becoming popular. The nuns, who symbolized traditional values and a religious lifestyle, were a striking contrast to the modern and confident image of the fashionable woman. This shift in culture led to greater acceptance of different lifestyles and a gradual decline in the influence of traditional institutions. Number 7. Eiffel Tower spiral ramp. In 1936, engineers came up with a wild idea to turn the Eiffel Tower into a giant spiral ramp for cars. Even though it never happened, the idea showed just how bold and imaginative architects were back then. The plan was to make the famous tower a working roadway, where cars could drive up and down its spiral paths. This ambitious idea was a symbol of the creative energy of that time, where people wanted to push the limits of engineering and design. In the end, the plan was rejected because it wasn't practical and would cost too much. Still, it's a cool example of how people tried to think outside the box and find new ways to use famous landmarks. Number 6. Cairo Mary. Cairo Mary, known for being a tough bar bouncer in California, was caught on camera throwing out a rowdy customer in 1953. This moment showed just how strong and no-nonsense she was. Back in the 1950s, bars were popular spots where people went to relax, meet others, and enjoy good music. Many had jukeboxes, live bands, and spaces for dancing, which created a fun and lively scene. But with all that energy and the effects of alcohol, things could sometimes get out of hand. That's where someone like Cairo Mary came in. Her strong presence kept things under control, making sure everyone could have fun without worrying about trouble. Number 5. Marketing for airlines in the past. Back in the 1960s and 1970s, airlines mostly advertised to men and often treated stewardesses as part of the entertainment. A former PSA stewardess once said, "Every day we wear orange," recalling how they had to put on a specific shade of lipstick called Hola Orange. They even had inspections to make sure their legs were shaved. These ads focused more on how stewardesses looked and acted than on their actual skills. Over time, though, things began to change. The airline industry started to highlight the importance of safety and good service, leading to more professional and respectful ways of showing flight attendants. While this was a bad approach, it wasn't as shocking as the next story involving modern-day Nazis. Number 4. Neo-Nazi March in Montreal. In 1992, this photograph showed some neo-Nazi groups who held a march in the streets of Montreal. This rally quickly led to a strong reaction from the community, as many people came together to protest against their hateful ideas. The march was meant to spread white supremacist beliefs, but it faced strong resistance from anti-racist groups and ordinary citizens who wanted to stand up for equality. After this event, more efforts were made in Montreal to fight against hate groups and encourage inclusivity. A photo from the march reminds us of the ongoing fight against extremist beliefs and shows how important it is for communities to stick together when faced with hate. This moment also highlighted how determined and united Montreal's diverse population was in rejecting intolerance. Number 3. Anti-war activists in London. Back in 1962, during the tense times of the Cold War, a group of anti-war activists came together in London. They carried signs and chanted, asking the world to stop building nuclear weapons. These protests showed how worried people were about the possibility of an atomic war. The marchers, who were part of different peace groups, walked through the streets, asking countries like the United States and the Soviet Union to stop the arms race and get rid of nuclear weapons. After these protests, more people became aware of the dangers of nuclear war, and support for the anti-nuclear movement grew. A photo of the marchers captures how scared people were of a nuclear disaster and how much they wanted peace. These efforts became part of a bigger movement that helped bring about important agreements, like the Partial Test Ban Treaty signed in 1963. Number 2. German SS troops at field cinema. During the dark days of the Second World War, a photograph taken in 1943 showed German SS soldiers watching movies at a makeshift outdoor cinema in the Soviet Union. It was strange to see how they could relax like that, even while being part of something so terrible. The outdoor cinema gave them a brief break from the awful things happening around them, letting them forget the war for a short while. However, these moments of relaxation didn't change what they were doing, or the outcome of the war. That photo of the soldiers enjoying a movie reminds us how people can act so normal even when they're involved in something so cruel and destructive. Number 1. Dar Robertson's stunt. Stuntman. Dar Robertson made history in 1974 by leaping from a 7-story building to test an inflatable rescue cushion. This groundbreaking safety device demonstrated its ability to save lives in high-risk situations. Robertson's daring stunt showcased the cushion's effectiveness in preventing severe injuries during falls, leading to its widespread adoption by fire departments and emergency services globally. The iconic photograph of Robertson's leap highlights the critical role of innovation in safety equipment and the courage of those who risk their lives to ensure public safety. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.